I gave you 10 years to live your life.
Now you see me rise.
And where did that get you? You walked in my shadow. I trained you. So the most dangerous people in the world couldn't kill you. Son, it's time for you to take your place by my side.
You better watch out, 'cause it's my time. When it's all mine.
That's not going to happen.
It's a new era, yes, I come alive. You woke up the dragon.
You can't outrun
I run from one.
who you really are.
Who are you?
Bugger.
Hold on, everybody! We make a good team.
Welcome back, everyone. This is going to be my Marvel Shang Chi trailer video. They finally released footage for the movie. It's coming out this September. There's a whole bunch of Easter eggs here. Obviously, this is the real Mandarin of the MCU, so we'll break everything down. If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of new mythology that Marvel is working into the MCU with this movie. These characters, or at least some of them, like the Mandarin, have supposedly been around for the entire existence of the MCU events. I'll explain what they're saying about the Mandarin's backstory. They're combining a couple different characters for some of what's happening during the movie. As you could probably tell, within the MCU, the Mandarin will be Shang-Chi's real father, which is a little bit different from his comic book backstory. Going the Star Wars route, only imagine your father was the Emperor. Most of you probably know Simu Liu from Kim's Convenience on Netflix, but he's done a bunch of other stuff as well, so you probably recognize him from at least somewhere. Awkwafina obviously playing his best friend that he meets when he goes out into the world, sort of leaves his father. But as you can see, the whole idea here is that his father, the Mandarin, whose real name is Wenwu during the events of the film, like he actually does have a real name, a real identity, aside from the Mandarin. Wenwu, the Mandarin, is basically training his son to be his chief lieutenant. Now, the really badass looking ninja in the mask that you see in the flashbacks when he's a little kid training and in present day is Death Dealer, sort of like his chief lieutenant. Most of these are all characters from the comics if you're not familiar, but some of them come from the Master of Kung Fu comics, some of them come from the straight-up Shang-Chi comic book title, which didn't really happen until after the 70s, after Marvel was introducing their own version of a Bruce Lee type character, and that's basically who he's built to be inside the MCU here. Marvel's version of Bruce Lee, so this is sort of like Marvel's version of Enter the Dragon, so to speak, only there are real dragons, as you see flying around in this giant battle scene in what looks like a really big flashback to ancient China. But obviously the other big thing that they show you here is the actual 10 rings, like the 10 rings of power inside the MCU. So obviously we have the real 10 rings organization, which we saw in the first time during the Iron Man movies, like the first Iron Man movie, the second Iron Man movie. Later you even see that members of the 10 ring have infiltrated Hydra as well, like you see the tattoo of the 10 rings inside the first Ant-Man movie. So it's sort of their way of weaving them into the backstory, the tapestry of the MCU history. Like they've been here this whole time, we just haven't really known what's really going on. But they do actually have the 10 rings of power like you see in the Iron Man comics. It's just the way they're explaining them is a little bit different. So as you can see on the Mandarin's arm here, this is who this is meant to be, even though they don't show his face in this giant battle. The giant rings look more like bands that he wears around his arms. Obviously you can't see all 10 of them, but that's basically what these are meant to be. And in present day, you see him attack that parlor there. He smashes his fist down. You see that blue energy rise up. Like here you can see Shang-Chi in his full-blown comic book costume fighting his father in his comic book costume wearing the 10 rings all lit up in what looks like present day with a lot of these other same monks or whatever's going on in the background of this fight of this temple. Like, one of these fights at this temple seems like it's happening in ancient times, and one of it seems like it's happening in present day. And I know a lot of you are asking, is Iron Fist going to show up during the Shang-Chi movies? Maybe during the sequels. There is something of an Easter egg here on the car, like you see Fist written on the side, so you could think of that as a reference to Iron Fist, just a subtle wink. They haven't fully explained his comic book costume, if there are any special abilities that it has, or if it's just a costume itself and all the power flows from him. But the whole idea is that he's trained as this really badass fighter, and I think the idea is that eventually he might wind up wielding the power of the 10 rings if he winds up defeating his father during the film. But most of this is all meant to be brand new mythology for the most part. Obviously, there's going to be a bunch of MCU Easter eggs and Iron Man Easter eggs because the Mandarin is a huge Iron Man character. But the only familiar thing you might recognize here is the streets of San Francisco, because that's where they're crashing this bus through. As you see Awkwafina trying to stop the bus as Razor Fist and his men, who is a comic book character, is trying to fight Shang-Chi while they're in the process of crashing the bus. But basically you have the Mandarin trying to compel him to come back and take his place at his side. Shang-Chi basically doing the Luke Skywalker thing, saying, I don't want to do that. So like I said, very Star Wars-y. Come to the dark side of the Marvel Force. If you're not a big comic book reader though, the change that they made to his backstory is that in the comics, his father is this evil sorcerer called Fu Manchu. So they're kind of combining the Fu Manchu character with the Mandarin of the MCU. I know we're all hoping to see Trevor show up somewhere during the movie, just some references to the Iron Man one-shot, All Hail the King, when the real Mandarin supposedly had his man break into the prison to capture him to make him atone for using his name in public. How dare you besmirch my name by using it and calling yourself the Mandarin? The whole reason that Kevin Feige made that Marvel one-shot was to tell people, no, there is an actual real Mandarin in the MCU, and he's super pissed off. But that was years ago when they released that. And I know a lot of you are now asking, because of this ancient battle here, it looks like some of them are wielding chi. Like, what is this energy that's radiating from all these sticks that they're fighting with? That probably has something to do with the history of the 10 rings inside the MCU. That could be their chi that they're wielding, it could be some sort of other alien energy. The whole idea with the 10 rings of power, at least in the comics, is they actually are made by this alien race of dragons who then crash land on Earth. The Mandarin, a long time ago in history, finds their crashed spaceship and takes the rings for himself, becoming the modern-day Mandarin. But in the comics, he's also extremely long-lived, like the rings themselves give him almost eternal life. The way some of this trailer footage looks, it also seems like he is extremely long-lived. Like, some of these fight scenes seem like they go back hundreds and hundreds of years just based on the way people are dressed. But it's kind of hard to tell because the footage doesn't look any different than the modern-day footage. But for the most part, Shang-Chi's backstory in the comics is that he is trained by this great villain, Fu Manchu, who wants him to join him in his criminal organization, but Shang-Chi decides that he wants to be good, and eventually winds up fighting on the side of the Avengers, the other good Marvel characters. He also eventually leads his own team called Agents of Atlas, but he does cross over with the Avengers characters. Obviously, the whole idea with Shang-Chi's character in the MCU is that he will eventually show up in Avengers 5 and be on one of the next Avengers teams. He's sort of like a Black Panther-style character who is very powerful in his own right, and obviously has this birthright, obviously a little bit different than Black Panther's birthright. But whereas the Black Panther movie introduced this whole African mythology to the MCU, Shang-Chi is doing the same thing with all this brand new Eastern Asian mythology, introducing that to the MCU. Like, a really cool Easter egg here that you probably spotted during this big fight scene, you see the Fu dogs that you normally find as statues at Chinese temples, you actually see are real and running around, like giant Fu dogs running around fighting in this battle, but also all these tiny little dragons. The race of dragons is called the Maculans. I don't know if they're actually going to explain that these tiny dragons that are flying around in this big fight scene are the Maculans themselves, or they're going to be a little bit different. There were some Funko toys of the actual dragon, they just called the Great Protector, so I don't know if that's going to be their version of Fin Fang Foom inside the MCU, and that's going to be the way they explain that, or if we'll see an actual Fin Fang Foom Easter egg, but there is supposed to be an actual big dragon during the film, and I believe that's supposed to be the quote-unquote Great Protector. Like, when the Mandarin captures Shang-Chi and brings him home, so to speak, back to wherever he comes from, with his friend Katie here, Awkwafina's character, you see him standing in front of this mural, you see a giant Chinese dragon in front of him, then all the water sort of comes out and stops midair and he's staring at it. That dragon seems like a depiction of the great dragons that you see flying around in this battle in the background. But a couple of the Easter eggs for other characters that you see running around in the background here that they don't completely explain. So in this fight scene here, you see the person in white, that's the Mandarin, like he's walking around in the white costume in present day when they come back to this 10 Rings home base. You see him in the white suit fighting this person in the green uniform with the hat on. That's supposed to be Jiang Li's character. I'm not totally familiar with who she's supposed to be, but Michelle Yeoh is also in the movie. She might wind up playing his mother or another character. The person that you see him fighting here in this MMA-style looking ring is actually his sister, Xia Ling. So they haven't seen each other for a while when the events of this pick up. Obviously, she's meant to be a badass as well. It's not really clear what their relationship is here or what her storyline is going to be during the film, but it does sound like she was also raised and trained by their father, the Mandarin, to take her place fighting at his side. I think the whole idea, though, is that the Mandarin wants Shang Chi to be his successor eventually, even though it does seem kind of like he has eternal life from the power of the 10 rings. The 10 rings of power in the comics are sentient, kind of like the Infinity Stones are sentient, but their different names are the Remaker, the Influencer, Spin, Spectral, Nightbringer, Daimonic, Incandescence, Lightning, Zero, and the Liar. And they all serve different functions. They have different powers, so people can use one ring at a time or they can use multiple rings at a time. The Mandarin obviously using 10 rings all at the same time to make himself almost all-powerful within the MCU. But they're not meant to be as strong as the actual Infinity Stones. It's not like the 10 rings are replacing the Infinity Stones, but they are sort of like a MacGuffin during the movie. I'm assuming Marvel's going to change at least a couple things about their backstory just to explain, because you have this giant fight here, and it seems like their energy flows from the same source as this energy of the other people that are fighting them at the temple. Not really clear what they're fighting over in this giant ancient war here at the Chinese temple, but this does look like they're going to tell you the origin story of the Mandarin himself, like before he became the Mandarin, who was he? And one of the other interesting things about the trailer footage you'll notice is that it doesn't really give you any dates or hard dates for when it actually takes place in the timeline. So I'm assuming that a lot of this will be taking place after the events of Avengers Endgame, but there'll obviously probably be flashbacks to before the snap, before Avengers Infinity War, Avengers Endgame. Like, I think the whole idea is that in present day, after the events of Avengers Endgame, Shang-Chi is a mid-20-something, relatively young guy, so he'll still be in his 20s when we get to Avengers 5 and he winds up joining the next squad. Still pretty young person, but older than Spider-Man, say, like Peter Parker in the MCU. A while ago, there was a rumor that they were going to do a very Enter the Dragon style tournament setting for the movie in present day at least. I don't know if that's going to be the same thing during this, because you obviously see him fighting his sister in the ring here, Xia Ling. But I think that comparison was only meant to be loose. Like, they're not literally doing the plot of Enter the Dragon. It's just doing a very Bruce Lee style film within the MCU. But because they say that the Mandarin has been around for the entirety of the events of the MCU, like he was here during the events of Iron Man 1, like with the exception of the Eternals, who go back thousands of years in the MCU, I'll talk about them in a second too, because obviously we haven't gotten an Eternals trailer yet. Mostly though, you think of the MCU, you think of the first Captain America movie as the beginning of the events of the MCU in the 1940s. So when they say the Mandarin has been around for this entire time for the events of all of these things, I'm assuming they'll explain how he's lived so long. And that'll probably be tied to the explainer behind the MCU version of the 10 rings. So even though you don't see a lot of it in this trailer here, during the movie there'll probably be Easter eggs and references to other major MCU events in history. Like obviously they'll probably reference the snap in the blip. And even though the Mandarin is this huge Iron Man villain in the comics, I'm not expecting to see Robert Downey Jr. cameo during the film in any flashbacks potentially. Obviously he's dead in present day, so I don't think they're going to bring Iron Man back in present day. But there are a lot of ways they can weave in Iron Man Easter eggs, because you have all that 10 ring stuff happening in the first couple of Iron Man movies. You also have the other characters like Randall Park and the Ant-Man characters who live around the San Francisco area, so we might see Jimmy Woo show up during the film at some point too, because I know after Wandavision everyone's hoping for him to be the close-up magic version of Coulson now in the modern-day MCU, just popping up in everybody else's films. I do expect Jimmy Woo to come back for Ant-Man 3, but I don't know when that movie is supposed to take place relative to the events of the Shang-Chi movie. I'm assuming that Shang-Chi in present day takes place before the events of Ant-Man 3. But in Marvel's release schedule for movies this year, Black Widow is coming this summer right before Shang-Chi in September, so I'm assuming we'll get another Shang-Chi trailer, or like a full Shang-Chi story trailer, which will tell you more about what's actually happening during the movie sometime this July. But if you spotted any big Easter eggs or other references to Marvel movies or Avengers Endgame, Avengers Infinity War, or anything else the Iron Man movies, just write them below in the comments. And obviously, we're going to slowly learn more about these characters. Marvel will release more details in the next couple of months. So of course, I'll do new videos for the movie. While you wait for everything, everyone click here for my new Falcon and Winter Soldier Episode 6 finale trailer video. And click here for that Iron Man one-shot, All Hail the King, with that big Mandarin scene of them revealing the real Mandarin. Thank you so much for watching. Everyone stay safe, and I'll see you guys tonight.